Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hi, I'm Kevin Vost with a new gift-giving idea. Are you trying to convince someone that God really does exist and that God really does care about them? Do you wish you could just hand someone a book that would prove God really does love them and that he really wants to be their friend? Well, there's a book out now that does just that. To find it, Google this title, Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. You'll find it instantly. Just Google Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. That's Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles.
We are on page 83 now, and the miracle story is called Bankrupt Factory Solution. I had one client who was financially on the edge of a cliff and just about to fall off into bankruptcy. It looked as if they would have to close their doors forever because nobody would loan them any further funds. In addition, they had recently written out more checks for total amounts which far exceeded what funds they had in the bank. A lot of checks were going to be bouncing because there wasn't enough cash in the bank to cover all the checks which were already mailed out. It was also very obvious that they were not going to be able to pay all of their employees their wages for the current week's pay, which would have to be paid within the next 7 days. I went off to a Catholic church at lunchtime to pray for wisdom and for help, and I was inspired by Jesus there with a need to go back to the office and to take a tour throughout the whole facility. I was inspired to look for opportunities to increase cash flow quickly when I got back. I began my tour of the facility in the shipping area and then proceeded into the factory. I was very surprised to notice that there was a 50-foot-long wall in the factory with shelves from the floor to the ceiling, which were all filled with finished goods products ready to be shipped out. I asked the production manager why all these products were sitting there in the factory collecting dust. The production manager very proudly explained to me that all of these products were stocked here to protect the company's slogan of always being able to ship product reorders more quickly than our competitors could do. I was inspired by Jesus to call a meeting of the partners that afternoon so I could tell the partners that they could not afford to be paying all the costs of keeping large inventories of stock right now because cash was extremely tight. And I also was inspired to convince them to have an immediate tag sale on the very next morning. Then, early the next morning, the partners and their key people called all the major customers and offered all these extra products at great discounts on the condition that we were allowed to ship for immediate COD cash payments in that week. We explained to the customers that we had a temporary cash problem, and we also had some products we could rush to them at special prices because we had overrun some past orders. The customers were blessed by God to have a loving and caring heart, and they really wanted to be helpful to us. We were able to sell about 80% of the finished goods products at an average discount of 10% in just a few days. This produced enough cash to totally solve the cash problem and to also cover their next payroll day. I am convinced that God worked this miracle to save this company from going out of business because we did sincerely ask God for his help. Jesus gave us enough time to turn everything around, and he then helped the company to succeed from that point onward. Thank you, Jesus. We are on page 85. The next miracle story is called An Unusual Industry and 777. Let us begin. I was inspired by Jesus in prayer to create a new business flyer and to send it out to business leaders in order to offer my consulting services to some potential new clients. While I was mailing them out, Jesus nudged me to send one to a company in an industry which was foreign to me. I had no prior experience in that industry at all. So I talked to Jesus about it for a while because I felt that I did not know enough about this industry and their products and services. Eventually, Jesus convinced me that I could be helpful to the organization in many other different ways, like internal controls, operational improvements, and cost efficiencies. We're on page 86 now. Well, they did actually call me in to evaluate their operations and performance. When we did meet, their leader told me that he was a man of prayer and that God had led him to call me as follows. Just 1 week before our actual first meeting, their leader had closed his office door and he was praying quietly for God to help him with a lot of stressful business problems that day, and Jesus had inspired him, saying, I am sending you a business consultant to come in and evaluate things for you. Just then, at that exact moment, he heard a knock on his office door, and his secretary came in and said, I know you are trying to solve some business problems right now, and I thought you might like to know that we just got this interesting flyer from a business consultant whom you might want to meet with. How amazing it was that God told the leader I was coming, and that God had my flyer reach him at that precise moment as he was hearing Jesus. That would have been enough of an amazing miracle for me, but God even went further to show me that he had drawn us together for this project as follows. As I opened their One Right checking account checkbook on my first day of the engagement, I noticed that the very next check number to be used would be 7770. That's 7,770. That famous 3 sevens again, the number for God. And I could see all 10 of the next 10 blank checks sitting there on one page. You know, in a One Right system, all the checks are sitting there in successive order. And here they were, 10 checks waiting to be used, and the numbers were 7770 through and including 7779. They were all going to be used on the very first week of my assignment. After they were used, the next number would obviously be 7780, and no longer in the 37 series. I felt Jesus smiling in my heart as this happened, because the number 777 is held as the holiest number in history, and it is often used to signify the permission, participation, or approval of God. The good spiritual meanings of numbers are explained in Exhibit A of this book later. For me, seeing this series of numbers with 10 checks all beginning with the number 777 on my very first day there reminded me that God had told me to send my flyer to this unusual industry, and that it did reach the company leader precisely on time as the leader was praying for help, and precisely as he was being told by God that a consultant was being sent to help him. In addition, my actually seeing that the next 10 checks were all going to be starting with the number 777 was a specifically timed miracle for me also, because it was happening only on this once-in-a-lifetime day, just as I was beginning the project. If I started the project 1 week later, I would have never noticed the numbers. The number 7770, starting with the number 777, will not happen again in this company until after they have written out another 70,000 checks in order to have 3 sevens be the first 3 digits in their check number. I only stressed that they need 70,000 checks to be written before this number to show up again, because I am absolutely impressed that God had me start this client on the date where I would see and understand the fact that their checkbook was all set up for me to notice this miracle at this time in history, and also exactly on the first day as I was beginning the project. So it was practically a once-in-a-lifetime miracle to see their checks when they had reached 7770 before their next 77,770. 70,000 checks later. When you look at Exhibit A, you will notice that Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, and Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, are both located at 777 meters above sea level. That fact should impress everyone that 777 is a very holy number indeed. For God to have created Bethlehem, Jesus' birthplace, and Golgotha, where Jesus died, both being at 777 meters above sea level. We are on page 89. The next miracle story is called Client 555 Car Event. Notice we're talking about 3 5s now, and we just finished talking about 3 7s. Let us begin. I met with another regular client, and we decided to meet for lunch at a local restaurant. While at lunch, we began to talk about the significance of numbers in some of the religious events in history, and I explained that number 555 is often used to indicate the word grace, which also means the presence of God. The client was excited to hear this because his mother always told him that something good was happening every time she saw the number 555 as he was growing up. Then, after his mom passed away, he began to also notice that the number 555 was always showing up whenever good things were happening in his life now, too. So he was delighted to hear that 555 indicated grace or the presence of God. Then we received the following clue miracle that God was really with us at our meeting. For you see, when we walked out to our cars, whereas my car was on the left and his car was on the right when we entered the restaurant, there was now another car parked right between both of us, and it had a license plate number 555. God is great and amazing to give us these miraculous clues. Unfortunately, many people miss all these coincidence miracles because they do not realize that God is creating all of the props, all of the circumstances, setting the stage in order to show His love to each one of us daily. God actually goes through a lot of effort to set up things so that we can notice that He is loving us. Just imagine, we were at the restaurant talking about 3 5s, and while we were doing that, a car with a license plate 555 pulled in and parked between both of our cars. We are now on page 90, and the miracle story is kill the promotion, steal the job. Once again, kill the promotion, steal the job. Let us begin. I was in line to become a senior manager in one of the companies I worked for. I had worked hard and earned the promotion, but another person in the company wanted the promotion instead. He actually formed a group of people to agree with him on some untruths about me in order to get me fired, promising them that if they supported him, that they would be well cared for by him after I was gone. He apparently reasoned that if he got me fired, he would then get the promotion instead of me. But God had some other plans, for you see, on the day that he and his co-conspirators were launching all of the forged documents and the lies about me, it was the feast day of St. Anthony of Padua, June 13th every year. On June 13th every year, we celebrate the feast of St. Anthony of Padua, and as you know, my name is Anthony. And on that day, he was meeting with conspirators to get me fired. Now, Jesus on that day had nudged me to be sure to go to morning mass before I walked into the office. I therefore, thanks be to Jesus, walked into the office with the holy presence of Jesus from morning mass residing within me in the form of the holy blessed sacrament of the Holy Eucharist from Mass. As I walked into the building, I stopped by the office where the conspirator was having his meeting to get me fired, although I did not find out about the purpose of the meeting until the next day. I had stopped by merely to say good morning on my way by the office he was using. However, the secretary outside of that office stopped me and told me that he asked her to not be interrupted and she would leave a message for him to call me later. I later found out from attendees in his meeting that precisely as I stopped by to say hello, that he had a sort of nervous breakdown and had to be rushed to the hospital with psychological help. The people he was meeting with did get him care from some capable medical professionals who were called in. He tearfully told the people at his meeting while he was being taken to the hospital that he did not know why he was always trying to get Tony, that's me, fired, and was always spreading lies about me. He admitted that I had done a lot to help him with his career, but he just kept finding himself hating me without being able to explain why. I too was sad because I thought he was my friend. I attribute all of my protection in this matter to Jesus Christ our Savior. It is notable that Jesus nudged me to get to morning mass beforehand, and Jesus also got me to notice that it was the feast day of St. Anthony of Padua. Then, as I was walking into the office where the conspirator was meeting, I was carrying the Blessed Sacrament of Jesus in my body because I had just attended morning mass. And that presence of Jesus, which we carry with us from Holy Mass each day, is truly all-powerful, as many saints have already taught us and proven to us in history. My boss and I developed a plan to help the man recover and to also find employment for him elsewhere after his recovery. Fortunately, I worked for a wonderful man and a great company in an era where companies tried to do the right things for their employees in situations like these. We are now on page 93, and the miracle we're talking about is called Peaceful Surroundings for Clients. Often, when I meet with clients who are having a lot of uncontrollable stresses about their businesses, I try to encourage them to find some time in peaceful meditation each day to get in touch with God. God does help all those who do call upon Him for help, but we do need to ask Him for help. I normally recommend ways for them to do this and gladly join them for the first couple of times so I can explain how I have benefited over the years in each method I recommend. On one occasion, I suggested that a client who was always stuck in their office, loaded with stressful issues and working long hours, should get out for a walk in a local, peaceful, and beautifully landscaped cemetery, just to walk there for daily exercise and also to pray and ask Jesus for wisdom each day. Catholic cemeteries are all blessed as holy grounds when they are opened, and they are also great holy places to walk in and pray in, both for the repose of the soul's presence there and also for our own needs as well. I drove the client to a really great cemetery, which I had used often and which radiated peace and the presence of God. There were many beautiful religious and angelic statues at that cemetery, which always helped me to think about God and heaven as I walked along there. Jesus nudged me to ask the client to pick the parking place for us to use. The space we used was about 1/4 mile in diameter. The client picked a very nice and peaceful spot to park in. Then, as we got out of the car to begin our peaceful and prayerful walk, he became excited and called me to come and look at what he was stunned and shocked by. The client had picked a place to park where, when he opened the door to get out of the car, he came face to face with a tombstone with his exact name on it. The tombstone was of a man with the exact same first and last name as my client's name, but for a man who had died about 40 years earlier. The client took this Co-Incidence miracle to be a definite clue from God to spend more time in prayer, and at this cemetery from then on. He told me that he really felt that Jesus had nudged him to pick that place to park on that day. It was a good thing that Jesus had inspired me to let the client pick the parking spot, so that the client would see that this coincidence miracle was indeed from God and specifically sent to the client directly from God. It would not have meant the same thing if I personally had picked the parking spot instead of the client doing it on this day. Imagine, the client picked the spot, he gets out of the car and sees his own first and last name on a tombstone right outside of the car door. It all was a beautiful and remarkable moment, and I was able to experience this and see the transition in a man who now radiated more and more peace every time we met after that day. Walking in a cemetery and asking God for wisdom works well for a few of my clients, and surely works really well for me personally too. Somehow God seems to be more present and real in a cemetery setting. Another place to get this peace is to visit an empty Catholic church and to sit and speak with Jesus there as well, because the Blessed Sacrament presence of Jesus is always there waiting for visitors. You do not need to be a Catholic to visit an empty Catholic church. Jesus blesses everyone who visits him there in the church, next to the tabernacle where Jesus waits for those who come to visit. You also do not need to be Catholic to visit a cemetery either. We're on page 96 now. The wisdom we get from going to morning Mass or by going to spend time with Jesus during the day, perhaps at lunchtime, is a tremendous amount of wisdom. Jesus solved many problems for me in my daily walks with him for many years in this way. I highly recommend some time every day to get to a quiet place at least 1 mile away from where your daily stresses take place, and to just ask for God's wisdom about all the problems and issues in our daily lives. God always has all the answers. We just need to spend time asking God questions and attentively listening to him speak in our hearts and in our minds as he answers every question one at a time. Sometimes it is even best not to ask any questions at all and to just ask Jesus to tell us what he wants to tell us instead. He knows all things, and he often tells me things that I have never thought to ask him about if I just sit and wait for his words to come. We're on page 96, and we're starting another miracle now called Precocious by God's Design. Let us begin. I heard a priest explaining that we all gain wisdom from God when we do things like read our Bibles, pray the Rosary, sit quietly and listen to Jesus speaking to us in our hearts and our minds, or attend daily Masses. He explained that all these things are methods of getting close to Jesus, and the more we do these things, the more we come to know and sense and enjoy the holy and close presence of Jesus in our lives. We can all attend daily Mass too, even if we are only spectators at Mass, because perhaps we are not Catholic. Non-Catholics are welcomed at daily Mass, even though they should never go up to receive the Holy Eucharistic Bread, which is given to Catholics at Mass. Non-Catholics need to discuss receiving the Holy Eucharist with a priest before attempting to do so, because it is a holy sacrament, blessed by God Himself at each Mass, and there are requirements and dispositions of the heart for our souls that are required of us before we can approach and receive this holy sacrament, which is God's actual presence in holy bread. St. Paul warns us in Scripture that we must never receive this holy sacrament in an unworthy manner. Here's 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 27, which says, by St. Paul, "Whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord." When I miss daily Mass, I notice that I do not have the same feelings of closeness to Jesus which I usually feel after I do attend daily Mass. This is a spiritual gift from Jesus, whom we receive when we all swallow the holy presence of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament each day. We cannot possibly bring ourselves any closer to Jesus than to personally appear at morning Mass to receive His holy presence into our own human bodies. Daily Mass was created by Jesus at the Last Supper 2,000 years ago to give us all a share in His life. We can coexist with Jesus within our own human bodies through the Eucharist. Reference John chapter 6, verse 53. In business, I often notice times when I feel led or nudged by Jesus to check on some policy or procedure, or to get up and go and ask someone a question about some project. It is so amazing to me how often these nudges from Jesus become miracles. It makes me look smart and precocious, but I know the wisdom all comes from Jesus, and I try to make that clear when I get undeserved compliments. In one case, I was put in charge of solving a huge problem. Why had the company lost well over $500,000 worth of inventory each year over the past 3 years? After checking all the other common causes of the problem, like this, with very little success, I prayed and was inspired by Jesus to check to see if the computers were calculating the values of inventory correctly. We were on an average cost system, which means that the computer has to constantly recalculate the average cost per unit every time new units are purchased and received into inventory, so that as they are received, a new average cost per unit is calculated. So Jesus nudged me to get up and walk over to our computer group, who had programmed the inventory system on their own instead of purchasing a pre-canned system to use. And we found the error was exactly that sort of error, which nobody would have expected except for being inspired by God to ask. In fact, the computer people even told me that the specs for the program that they wrote did state that what I described was exactly what they had programmed the system to do. When I checked, however, it turned out that the computer programmer did not follow his supervisor's instructions. He had made an error in the programming, which caused the annual $500,000 problem. I found many instances like this in my business career where Jesus nudged me to check things just in the nick of time. After that happens to us about 3 times a day, we begin to notice that it has to be God giving us the ability to know things. This just makes us look precocious and smart. but we know the truth is that we are really being blessed with wisdom by Jesus, our best and perfect friend. If we are doing things to get close to God each day, like going to Mass, reading the Bible, or saying the Rosary, then God sees and knows that we are trying to coexist with Him and trying to be His friend. And I have noticed that when God sees us trying to reach Him, that He then decides to meet us more than halfway. God has made each one of us to be His personal friend, and He does not waste any time helping us to find Him as soon as He sees us looking for Him. We are on page 100, and we're going to be reading the 777 Client Confirmation. Let us begin. I had to book 2 clients who had each called me for an appointment. I sensed Jesus nudging me to meet with my current client before setting up a meeting with the newer client for that day. I agreed to meet the current client at his home because he also had an office in his home as well. As I drove over, I was tempted to wonder if I had misunderstood Jesus and perhaps the other client might have needed my help more quickly. I began to doubt. As soon as I walked in the front door of my client's home, I noticed their teenage daughter was working on her personal computer. Then, before I even had gotten through the doorway yet, she excitedly blurted out in a loud voice, saying, "Yikes! I have 777 emails in my inbox to be read." Now, since 777 is the number indicating God's permission, participation, or approval, I knew that I was in the right place precisely as I walked through the door by hearing the teenager's 777 statement. The timing of the teenager's comment was too timely and too precisely perfect for it not to be a miracle, especially since I had just begun to doubt which meeting I should be attending just before I arrived. In addition, Jesus also said in my heart, "See, you are in the right place." This is another example of why I often say, after God befriends us, His miracles automatically become a part of our daily lives.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT.